Introduce yourself and from where you are speaking. So the place where you are at present.
I'm in Canary Islands in Spain.
Please introduce Dr. Marcus. Okay, Dr. Marcus is a world-known IVF specialist. He is a pioneer in the field of natural and minimal stimulation IVF, and we are currently lucky to have him at Avea Fertility. He is presently living in Spain, Canary Islands, with his 4 children and his wife. Dr. Marcus, you will be joining the panelists. The panelists here are Dr. Puneet Rana from Delhi, Dr. Savannah from Delhi, Dr. Sini Venugopal from Bhubaneswar, Dr. Aditya from Bhubaneswar, Dr. Anupama from Haldwani, and Dr. Singh from Moradabad.
Dr. Anita Rastogi, please introduce Dr. Nisha Bhatnagar, our moderator for the panel discussion.
Dr. Nisha Bhatnagar is a senior obstetrician and gynecologist.
Please check the mic.
Hello. Dr. Nisha Bhatnagar is a senior obstetrician and gynecologist, and she is an IVF specialist in Avea. She's in a Avea IVF center. She did her interest in the field of infertility, and she is perfect. She persuaded her patients, and
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
First of all, clear handwritten, so I'm sorry.
It's okay. First of all, I would like to thank Dilemmas. I have a beautiful panel. So I think we'll be able to sort all our problems here. First of all, I would like to pose a question to Dr. Savannah. Dr. Savannah, what investigation would you like to do? A patient comes to you for the first time. So what investigation would you like? What treatment options can you give to the patient? And what will be your plan of starting the treatment?
I'll just make that, Dr. Nisha. I will just make this short because we have a long discussion. When the patient comes to me for the first time, the most important thing I feel is a proper history taking. Because so many times I find a couple coming to me with infertility, but then when I take a proper history, they have not consummated a marriage or time intercourse had not happened. So first of all, time intercourse after proper history taking. Number 1, IUI, IVF. I will not go into detail. Now about the investigations. Irrespective of the patient profile, I usually do a good day 2 ultrasound for the antral follicle count and number and quality. And depending on the patient's age, younger age group, I will go ahead with a minimum test of thyroid function I usually do, and prolactin I usually do. And if it is above 35 years, older age group, and any previous history of any ovarian surgery, or most important, any history of the premature menopause in the family, then I would go for ovarian reserve tests like day 2, FSH, LH, AMH, so on. And what is the other question?
Okay, so here I would like to say that only 3, intrauterine, IVF and ICSI, these are the techniques we are offering to the patients. The success rate of the clinic should be told to the patient in the beginning, and even after doing all these techniques, the take-home baby rate is roughly around 20% in the most efficient clinics. Okay, and one more thing I would to clear is that there is no increase in the incidence of congenital anomalies. The most important determinant in the line of action in the management is the age of the female patient. Okay, so the whole management changes if a patient comes at 25 and the patient comes at 35. At 25, the cumulative pregnancy rate after 1 year is around 85%. However, the same changes to about 85% in 2 years. So the most important factor is age. And usually the ASHRAE has classified the investigations into 3 parts. I would only mention those who have correlation with pregnancy, and these are the semen analysis, the tubal patency test, and the mid-luteal progesterone to diagnose ovulation. Okay, these 3 tests we should do for any patient who comes to us for further management and planning. These are not related to these things. And these guidelines I have from
Would we add thyroid and prolactin levels, the TSH and prolactin levels also as primary investigation?
If a patient is having regular cycle, as Dr. Savannah mentioned, that the history taking is very important. Usually there is no problem with the thyroid. I would like to do, because basic thyroid hypothyroidism, subclinical hypothyroidism sometimes is there. But if the patient is having regular cycles, no menstrual irregularities, I don't think prolactin needs to be done for all the patients.
I usually do prolactin, practically.
Okay. So, now next question. Dr. Puneet, please. Now this is a 26-year-old lady. She's married since 3 years. She's having regular cycles. On her day 2 scan, we have 5 to 6 follicles in both the ovaries. Okay. Semen analysis is normal as per WHO standard. Can you please elaborate how will you go for the management of this patient?
So I think you very nicely elaborated the kind of investigations we should do in the previous slides. So I would just go with those. I mean, there is some mention of ovarian reserve as documented by 5 to 6 antral follicular count, which is apparently normal. She's got a regular cycle. So I think in this, the most important thing is the duration. So it's a 3-year duration fertility. She's a young woman who's got good reserve, but it's the duration. So something is more complex in this. So the other things, the tubal assessment is not mentioned here. So that would be the next thing definitely would like to explore. What way should we do it? Whether we should do it HSG or leproscopy or hysteroscopy? I think I would go more with lepro and hysteroscopy rather than a simple HSG for tubal assessment.
Dr. Puneet, can you just give us a few words on PCT?
Postcoital test, traditionally I think if we see historically how it came out because that time we didn't have much advanced technologies and ART techniques. But now we are at a stage where we are more, I would say, technologically savvy. In this particular case, I would say, like Dr. Savannah mentioned, that timed intercourse history would play a role. If the couple have been having very, very regularly timed intercourse, then PCT would not make much difference. But yes, if they give a history that they haven't been regular, they haven't been using the fertile period, then whether to decide whether to give them more natural method of conception or to go for IUI or IVF, then PCT can play a role.
Beautifully summed up. Yeah, exactly. Only thing I would say is that first timed intercourse, and maybe we should go for tubal patency because 3 years, as you correctly mentioned. Okay, so investigations, it is postcoital test is not recommended as a routine investigation of the infertile couple. Even sperm function test we do not need, because here we have just seen the semen analysis is normal and we do not need to go into details of sperm function test. It is to be done only when we consider the patient for IVF. Routine investigations, hysteroscopy even is not needed. Sometimes we are planning for hysteroscopy or something else. Okay. So now coming to HSG, Dr. Puneet, can you please do we need an endometrial biopsy for all patients before HSG?
If it's a 3-year duration and if she gives any history of previous pelvic infections or pulmonary tuberculosis or things like that, yes, and it is mandatory to rule out pelvic tuberculosis. So normally if in my practice I talk about a patient with 3-year duration, I do normally endometrial biopsy for Cox culture, AFP culture.
I would just add that we do a mid-cycle scan around day 12 to 14. If the endometrium is trilaminar, beautiful 8 to 9 millimeter and with good vascularity, we usually do not go for endometrial biopsy. But before doing a HSG, yeah, we go for an endometrial biopsy and rule out tuberculosis. And Dr. Aditya, can you mention the role of HSG?
No, I little bit differ with the madam. Initial investigations, why we should go for hysterolaparoscopy, even HSG. 26-year-old with good antral follicle count, what it appears she may not be having any pelvic pathologies. So she has not been treated at all. So initially 2 to 3 cycles, why not some ovulation induction, some kind of medical intervention. And if she is not conceiving, later on she should undergo tubal patency test.
Okay. So if the HSG shows some delayed spell or something, then you go for leprohysteroscopy.
Yes, still then, if one tube is showing patency, still we can wait for some time. If both the tubes are not showing patent, and maybe that case, after still we should give them a gap of 2 to 3 months or 4 months, and thereafter she can be advised for an laparoscopy, hysterolaparoscopy.
I think here we have reached an agreement that it is the role of HSG, role of endometrial biopsy, and role of hysterolapro is definitely patient dependent. According to the patient, you have to decide that whether the patient needs to go for HSG, whether the patient needs some further diagnostic hysterolapro. Okay.
For tubal thing, I think we should agree to disagree.
Yeah.
We have to individualize
And
every
as
patient.
Dr. Farooq sir already said, the moderator's words are final.
Very true.
So Dr. Puneet, how many IUI or timed intercourse, how long would you like to wait for this patient? Like how many cycles of timed intercourse or IUI would you recommend?
So if all is normal, let's say if it comes to a case where it's unexplained subfertility, you can give the patient option of either timed intercourse or IUI. If you're doing timed intercourse, you can give monitored 6 cycles. And if you are doing IUI, if all is normal, you should start considering after 3 cycles as to how to do, whether to give a 4th cycle or to proceed up the ladder. So I think it should be in conjoined discussion with the patient. That is very, very important.
I think counseling plays a very important role here. Okay, so for tubal infertility, IVF should be considered first line of treatment. These are the ASHRAE guidelines. Both surgery and IVF should be discussed without any bias to the patient, and there is no randomized comparison as of now between IVF and tubal surgery. So we can't decide. Okay, so Dr. Manisha, we have Dr. Manisha with us?
Yes.
Dr. Manisha, hi. This is a 32-year-old lady. She has a 32 BMI, PCOS, irregular cycles. Her AMH is 6.2. What will be your line of management as this patient?
As you have already tested her for the AMH is very high, so it is in PCO range. LH is high, LH-FSH ratio more than 2 is also suggestive of PCO. Her BMI is high. Since PCO is a metabolic disorder in which there is raised LH, raised androgens, which lead to an ovulation. So I would like to know for how long she is married and what is the previous treatment history and her menstrual history. And
she is married for 2.5 years and having irregular cycles. She has not taken any treatment till now. She has come to you for the first time.
Okay, then I will do first day 2 ultrasound to confirm my diagnosis of PCO. If the day 2 scan shows more than 12 follicles in each ovary of less than 10 mm size and increased stromal echogenicity, then definitely she is PCO. And there are certain other investigations which I'm not regularly doing, like fasting insulin level and fasting blood sugar to insulin level or GTT, because these patients are more prone for diabetes mellitus, and DHEA level and testosterone level if later if she is not responding to any of the treatment. And regarding the line of management, these patients, since this is metabolic disorder, definitely lifestyle modification helps them a lot, in which the exercise plays important role. Doing exercise for 5 days in a week or reducing 5 to 10% weight help these patients, and they respond better to the treatment, and the dose required is also less. And they should decrease the caloric intake also, and decrease the food which have high glycemic index. So lifestyle modification is the first line of management in such patients.
Would you like to wait for the lifestyle modification to act and then start?
Yeah, definitely. If
you will give her some time frame further for 6 months and
no, not like that. They go hand in hand. But we should give them some time, like 1 month or so, in which we are waiting. So it will work if we give them some time.
Dr. Puneet, do you believe in insulin sensitizers?
These are, I would say, new drugs on the road. Insulin sensitizers, myo-inositol. They do have a logical sense in obese PCOS patients with high glucose tolerance test and high, normally I don't do insulin, but I would say I go more on the oral glucose tolerance test. So they do have a role in those. So yes, they do have a selective role. But if we look at the evidence, the randomized control trial, there's only a single randomized trial, and it doesn't support the use of such medications in our practice. But still we are using it, I think, left, right, center.
You two are using insulin sensitizers and myonisitol?
Actually, as per the guidelines, if you are going for an IVF, then in those cases definitely metformin is said to have a role in reducing the incidence of OHSs. But otherwise, if you are just going for ovulation induction in a PCOS patient, usually we never use metformin or myo-inositol as a regular treatment part.
If we have a documented insulin resistance, I guess there definitely metformin has its role.
So the panel agrees on the use of metformin, and myonisitol is still dicey. Diagnosis of PCOS is ultrasound guided. Dr. Savana, would you like to please give us a brief briefing about how do you assess the ovarian reserve? What is the value of AMH? How do you assess the ovarian reserve?
Ovarian reserve, actually, we do not do for all the patients. We do for selective criteria, for selective patients. Usually I do day 2, LH and FSH, E2, and AMH level I do almost for almost all the patients. And also there is something called clomiphene challenge test. We give clomiphene from 5 to 9, D5 to D9. Then we assess on D10, we assess LH and FSH to see the change in the ratio. Otherwise, AMH up to 1.52 should say okay. Like I would be happy from 2 to 5 AMH, I would be happy with that.
Well, according to me, ma'am, enteral follicular count should be our
yes, enteral follicular count should be included in the.
It should be our prime way of assessing. Many a times we do see that AMH levels are low, but if they are fair on enteral follicular counts, we always get a better result. So, with experience, what I have learned is give most importance to enteral follicular count along with AMH.
Yes.
Actually, AMH plus enteral follicle count gives a better prediction.
See, sometimes the lab values are not that reliable. Sometimes what we believe is what we see. Okay, so I think even enteral follicle count deserves more merit than the AMH values.
Yeah, but AMH should be included.
Okay, the first drug of choice, Dr. Puneet, for inducing this patient?
I would go with oral anti-estrogens. Clomiphene would be my first choice. The dose should be carefully thought of because she's got she's BMI of 32. So maybe the starting dose I would keep it as 100 milligrams for 5 days.
Dr. Marcus, can you hear us? Dr. Marcus?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to know your input about letrozole because letrozole is banned here. I just wanted your views, how it is used worldwide, and like it can be used as a first drug of choice for PCOS or not.
We are using letrozole as a first choice everywhere in the world. It is much better than clomazone effectively. And we consider it as a safe drug. I don't know why in India it is done.
Thank you. Okay. So first drug of choice worldwide else it is letrozole. India still with clomiphene only. And how would you monitor the cycles, Dr. Manisha?
First of all, day 2 ultrasound to check is there any cyst.
So we are monitoring the cycles.
Okay.
Now
Then day 7 ultrasound followed by day 9, day 11 to check how the follicle is growing and how many follicles are growing. With CC we can have these PCO patients, they have many follicles which are sensitive to CC. So there may be more than single follicle which is of more than 14 mm or dominant follicle.
Any role of doing E2 values here, Dr. Anupama?
E2 levels at the baseline scan, at day 2 itself, if they are very high, maybe there's some old cyst present or there are multiple follicles present. So that cycle is not a very good cycle for me. And I would like to, in such patients, there would be a role of OCPs.
What would be the choice of trigger, Dr. Sunny?
In a case of PCOS and where you are expecting that there can be chances of OHSS, if you are monitoring the cycle and if you are getting few cycles, if this is only ovulation induction, then you can give a trigger with HCG with good monitoring. But if it is a IVF, definitely the trigger would be GnRH analogs, agonist.
Okay. Because the risk of OHSS is always there. We give trigger with GnRH agonist, and if we give trigger with GnRH agonist, what extra precautions would you take in the luteal phase?
I would like to take some input from Madam. Madam, we are discussing about ovulation induction in PCOS, particularly baseline. We are considering for IVI or with or without IVI, definitely a PCOS patient who is not for IVF. So in that case, unless otherwise there is some ultrasound findings which shows the patient may go for OHSS, I think still we should give HCG as a trigger only, primary trigger.
Yeah, that is what I said. If it is a ovulation induction cycle and you are not seeing any, like the patient has a chance to go because you are monitoring with ultrasound the follicles, then definitely the trigger is HCG only.
We can give dual trigger also with half of recombinant HCG.
Trigger is usually, Dr. Manisha,
for IVF only. For IVF, yeah.
For IVI, we usually don't recommend dual trigger. If we have to go, if there are more than 4-5 follicles, more than 14 millimeter size, we can convert the cycle to even IVF.
I would like to add something in PCOS patients. In PCO patients, the oocyte quality generally remain very, very, very poor.
Yes.
In that case, we can do some modification in the triggering and the further outcome. We can give the short trigger that may be of 30 hours followed by the IVM, so that the oocyte may have sufficient time for the maturation, because ultimately we are concerned with the formation of the good embryos, and that good embryos may become only when we are having the M2 stage oocytes. If we are not having the oocyte in M2 stage, we can't have anything.
So you mean to say that we give a short trigger for 30 hours
only,
and then
I have tried in so many patients that if they are having the suppose 30-40 follicles, and if we will give the full trigger of 36 hours, then there is a possibility then some may get ovulate, and that can release the follicular fluid in the abdomen. That can give the again problem. So before they get ovulate, we extract all the oocytes and give them the opportunity for the IVM. In that way, we can have the good oocyte after fertilization and in the cleavage embryo stage.
And Dr. Jain, how much is the period for maturation you give to the oocyte IVM?
No, that we give after taking.
How many hours?
That is for 24 hours.
24 hours. And next day you do ICSI?
Actually, I do. As soon as we extract the oocytes, we give them in the IVM media and inseminate after 2 hours, and then again put in the normal media after 24 hours processing. So that IVM is just of 24 hours. In that case, we can improve the oocyte quality as well as final embryo and implantation rate also.
Thanks. Dr. Puneet, your inputs on minimal stimulation protocols, please.
So, I would use minimal stimulation protocols in mainly broadly 2 cases, I would say. The one which are poor responders. Poor responders means who have behaved poorly in the previous cycle, or their ovarian reserve with antral follicular count and AMH is suggesting to be on the lower side. And secondly, I would use more in cases where there is a financial implication, because in those patients I think it can be justified, and we get good results in those patients.
The purpose of minimal stimulation protocol is just to get 4 to 6 eggs. Do not overstimulate the ovaries. So the cost of gonadotropins used is very less, and patient gets good quality oocytes and definitely good pregnancy rate. So for ovulation disorders, we all agree that clomiphene is an effective.
I had a query, if you allow. We don't have letrozole here. For minimal stimulation instead of letrozole, are you using anastrozole?
No, we can use clomiphene also.
We can use clomiphene also, but the thing is that then if we use clomiphene, we prefer to freeze off. We do not do transfer in that cycle. Because if we use clomiphene in 100 milligram doses, the effect on the lining is bad. Yeah. We just freeze all and transfer in the next cycle. Ovulation induction with clomiphene is the line of choice here. And with clomiphene 70 to 80%, cumulative rate over 60%, 70% achieve pregnancy at doses of 100 milligram. More than 100 milligram is not recommended. And there is no advantage of using gonadotropin releasing hormone analogs in conjunction with gonadotropin for ovulation induction in women with clomiphene resistant PCOS. Okay, so next question, Dr. Aditya, please. 26-year primary infertility patient with regular cycles, normal hormonal profile, with a 30-year-old husband. The semen analysis shows azoospermia. What will be your line of action, plan, and how will you treat this?
Yes, we had earlier a lot of discussion on this. Still I stick to that because particularly coming to the female factor first. 26-year-old and as normal hormonal profile, regular cycles. So and a definite male factor is there. So I don't want to spend money or time mostly on the female. Definitely I will first rule out.
Let's leave the money part aside because
no, still then, whether if the patient is also having money, also it is also not recommended to do all basic investigation of the female, minimal investigation for the female, and we have to focus on the male factor because a definite factor azoospermia is there. Then, so we have to evaluate the azoospermia, the cause of azoospermia, the level where it has happened, whether it is treatable or not treatable. If it is treatable, whether some urosurgical solution is possible or not possible, or whether he needs some kind of retrieval and later on ICSI and all those things. And according to that, we have to evaluate the male partner, and definitely if patient's financial concern is there, in those cases IUI donor we may have to think. And if a patient is quite capable, then definitely in today's era of ICSI, we should always consider sperm retrieval and ICSI.
So the investigations say, the guidelines say that the male partner should normally have 2 semen analysis. Only 1 semen analysis you can't label as azoospermia. Laboratories that perform semen analysis should undertake, according to WHO methods, laboratories should practice internal quality control. In considering the result of semen analysis for the individual couple, it is important to take into account the duration of infertility and the woman's age and previous pregnancy history. Further investigations should be preceded by a clinical examination. So you should rather bother to rule out whether it's obstructive, or you should do a clinical examination of the male and then proceed further. The FSH-LH levels should be done. If FSH-LH levels are too high, you won't find any sperm even after doing a TISA. So there is no point in doing TISA for a FSH-LH levels high. Testicular biopsy should be performed only in the context of a tertiary services. Okay. Dr. Anupama, coming to our next question. This is a 32-year-old lady, married since 4 years, regular cycles, but she has severe dysmenorrhea. History is suggestive of dyspareunia as well. She is euthyroid. There is delayed spill present on HSG. Semen is normal. So your line of management, please.
Well, at the outset, it's the severe dysmenorrhea which is taking my attention, and for the benefit of the audience, I would want to say this that any patient with severe dysmenorrhea, we all should have very low threshold of suspecting endometriosis. This patient is also giving history of dyspareunia, so we should be more skeptical about that. And this patient, she's married for 4 years. I would first like to do a good scan on her, and if the scan is suggesting something related to that, I usually see, with my experience, whatever I can add is that I usually see in an endometriotic patient, the uterus is many a times retroverted with endometriomas found both the sides. So in such a patient, I would want to see what her basic enteral follicular counts are. Because very fast, very fast, these endometriosis patients, they lose on their follicles. The ovarian reserve is lost very fast. So the only take-home message for this slide would be that you should not sit and wait in endometriotic patient. She needs an early treatment. Now that early treatment can be IUI for a cycle since she's having spill, but I would rather going for IUI, I'm doing IUI to assess the dose of gonadotrophins, what dose she's responding to. If she's not responding to say 150, I know that I have to go for a high. basically it depends on what her AMH levels are, what her basic counts are. But then in IVF, my treatment protocol, how it would go, would depend what that particular cycle which I have induced, she has behaved in that cycle.
Point of here is that whether you proceed for hysterolapro and proceed.
Medical management as it is for the mild ones, the mild endometriosis is now out. That medical management, you should not waste time. For big endometriomas, definitely you should go for a surgery, because big ones, the 4 centimeter larger than that, they do need aspiration, because then they would interfere in our results. But then main thing is,
you would go for aspiration, or you would go for hysterolapro?
Hysterolapro. I would like to drain rather than aspiration. But then the main thing I would say is that don't waste time. Whatever procedure you have decided, do it fast. OCPs, I would really not waste my time giving her OCPs. If her criteria is infertility, if her problem is pain or some late age patient, then OCPs have a very good role. But now in this particular patient, no, I would actually go in and stimulate her.
So guidelines say that endometriosis should be classified according to the revised AFS system. Surgical ablation of minimal and mild endometriosis improves fertility in subfertile women. Medical treatment of minimal and mild endometriosis does not enhance fertility in subfertile women. Ovarian stimulation with intrauterine insemination is more effective than either no treatment or IUI alone in subfertile women. There is no evidence that medical management of moderate and severe endometriosis, either alone or as an adjunct to surgery, improves fertility. Surgical treatment of moderate and severe endometriosis may improve fertility, but controlled studies and comparisons with assisted reproduction techniques are required. In cases of moderate and severe endometriosis, assisted reproduction techniques should be considered as an alternative or following an unsuccessful surgery. Where large and ovarian endometriotic cysts are present, consideration should be given to their surgical treatment, because this may enhance spontaneous pregnancy and improve success if IVF is planned. What would be the Dr. Puneet, what would be the preferred protocol if this patient decides to go for IVF?
So it will depend on the ovarian reserve a lot. So the protocol would be gonadotrophin. I would not consider minimal stimulation in this patient. So there's a debate between whether you give them long agonist protocol or antagonist protocol. And there has been a wonderful study from Denmark which has showed no difference in these two protocols. So traditionally we have been thinking of long protocols for this. But then if we are using the ANTAG protocol, then we should keep a low threshold for freezing the embryos and putting it in a subsequent cycle. Because the logic is that ANTAG protocol can aggravate the endometriosis and affect the pregnancy outcomes. So in a way, I would say if the ovarian reserve is good, you can consider long or short, doesn't matter. If the ovarian reserve is low, I would go for antagonist protocol.
Thank you, Dr. Puneet. Now, Dr. Marcus, this is 32-year-old primary infertility hypothyroid patient, married for Dr. Marcus. You there?
Yes, I can see your slides.
Okay. This is a 32-year-old primary infertility lady with hypothyroid. She is on treatment with Thironol, stimulated with clomiphene citrate 100 mg for 5 days. Follicle monitoring was done in that cycle and IUI was done. The result of this cycle was negative. Now in the next cycle, on second day of her scan, she has a 14 mm follicle which is present in the right ovary. Can you please brief us on the management of this patient?
Okay, so she has had clomiphene treatment and she was triggered with HCG, right?
Yeah.
So this combination usually makes more dominant follicles or cysts in the subsequent cycle, because the clomiphene has a long half-life and still keeps acting in the body, and the same is true for HCG. So the combination of both keeps stimulating. So we have a cyst or dominant follicle in the subsequent cycle, and we cannot start a next treatment plan. Okay. So what is the easiest way to act is to give the patient 0.2 mg decapeptide to make this follicle rupture and then give them 10 days of pills. After stopping the pills, we can restart the next cycle. Normally, the line of acting is giving the patient the pill for 2 or 3 months. Pill or cyst is gone.
Dr. Marcus, you said
But this is
you said that the combination
Sorry?
you said that the combination of clomiphene citrate and HCG has the cyst in the first half of the next cycle. So, would you suggest triggering the patient with decapeptyl even in the IUI cycles when the clomiphene citrate is used?
That would avoid that kind of problem, yes, definitely.
Okay. So, I would like to have your views on luteal phase supports, Dr. Puneet.
So it depends on whether the patient has been stimulated with oral anti-estrogens or gonadotrophins. And also it depends on number of follicles developing. The more the number of follicles developing and the gonadotrophins being used, then there is a strong role of luteal support. In case of single follicles with clomiphene, in those cases we don't need to consider intense luteal phase supports.
Dr. Savannah, can you please mention few progesterone preparations you are using and what route would you prefer?
This one, Dr. Nisha, here I would like to highlight again why I do thyroid profile for each and every patient. Hyper and hypothyroid, through an intricate mechanism, they are known to have some effect on the luteal phase. About the preparations, I use many drugs on the market, but I usually use micronized progesterone 200, 300, 400 per vaginal, oral, as per the patient preference. And nowadays we have a newer aqueous, this one progesterone injection to about 15 to 20 milligram per day. Injection, the claim is painless. I do not know painless or not because I have not taken it. But this is painless. And the other drugs like HCG injection 1500 to 2000. But I stick to micronized progesterone 200, 300, 400 as per the patient preference.
So the American Society for Reproductive Medicine recommends using progesterone for luteal phase support, and it is strongly recommended in ASRM 2015. After vaginal preparations, the endometrial levels are very high. However, after the intramenstrual preparations, the serum levels are very high. So, we just have a brief slide here using different routes. Definitely, vaginal is preferred than any other route. Dr. Sini, now coming to our last question. This is a 32-year-old lady for IVF for antagonist protocol, started stimulation with 300 IU of FSH. On day 10, on ultrasound, there were good 8 to 10 follicles of about 18 to 20 millimeters seen in the both the ovaries. Endometrium here is 7.8, trilaminar, but there is a minimal fluid in cavity. How would you manage this case?
Actually, this presence of fluid in cavity, it is a very distressing clinical thing for the ART clinician actually. And when you see this, actually what it's very unclear as to what is the origin or source of this fluid. Can be a fluid which has reflux from the hydrosalpinx, and sometimes it is also seen in cases where there is no hydrosalpinx also. So once you see this fluid, it becomes a very tricky situation, because sometimes during the gonadotropin stimulation phase and the HCG you see the fluid, but at the time of transfer you usually see that the fluid has disappeared. But in spite of that, and in some cases it still persists. But even if it disappears, it is the presence, once you have seen fluid during the cycle, it is said to have a negative impact on pregnancy and implantation. So particularly in these cycles, counseling is very important. You need to counsel the patient, and you have to cancel maybe transfer in that particular cycle, and you have to plan transfer in a subsequent cycle.
Freeze all is the option.
Yeah, there are studies saying about this transmyometrial transfer, but practically I have never done that, so always prefer to cancel the cycle, transfer in that cycle.
So coming to some newer concepts, Dr. Manisha, I would like to have your views on GCSF instillation.
GCSF is a cytokine which causes macrophages proliferation and neutrophilic granulocyte proliferation in endometrium in decidual cell. So it has found some role in endometrial proliferation, especially in thin unresponsive endometrium, which is not responding to traditional treatment like estrogen, sildenafil, and aspirin. So there are many studies which have shown that there is increase in the endometrial thickness if it is given on the day of on the day of rupture, 6 to 8 hours before giving rupture, and to check the endometrial thickness 48 hours after on the day of pickup, and we can repeat the injection on that day also. So these studies have shown that they have role in thin endometrium and recurrent implantation failure, and also some role in recurrent miscarriages. But still there needs some more studies and some more data to confirm whether they are really effective or not.
In my small experience, I would like to say that I have seen GCSF installation works in some cases. It does not work at all in some other cases.
Yeah.
Second thing is that it might improve endometrial thickness a bit, but it definitely improves the endometrial vascularity.
Yeah.
And third thing is that we are putting GCSF installation on days 7, 9 and 11 for IUI cycles.
Okay.
For the IVF cycles, we are doing as you are doing on the trigger.
There are some studies which some people they are also doing this, that they are giving it subcutaneously after embryo transfer, but we don't know.
Installation has to be done subcutaneously. It does not work.
Yeah.
Dr. Anupama, can you please add on DHA and other adjuvants which are used in?
Well, DHA is much in vogue these days. Every second prescription is having DHA, and I would just add that DHA is mainly for the premature ovarian failure poor responder patients. It is not for any infertility patients that DHA prescription should be going. And DHA is basically a pro-hormone which is required, which is normally produced in our body from the adrenal cortex and from the ovaries theca cells. And if we are supplementing this for a while, say if we are giving DHA for more than 3 months, then we are giving that precursor in the body, and that precursor can increase the androgen content, and later on it can improve the results in ovarian failure patients. Number of oocyte pickups has been found to improve. But then again, there is much controversy and much more studies are required for final words.
DHA works in some cases, it doesn't at all in some other cases. And basically again, it is age dependent. A lady, young age, having poor ovarian reserve will be benefited by DHA, but not an older one.
Yes.
Dr. Sini, can you please tell us something about endometrial scratching?
Endometrial scratching, this is actually an induced injury which is done to the endometrium, usually in the cycle which is the previous cycle, the cycle before when you are planning to do IVF or a controlled ovarian stimulation. So in the previous cycle you have to do this endometrial scratching, just like a biopsy or like taking a pupil biopsy from the endometrium. And the concept is that by doing this induced injury, you are causing the release of some growth factors and some cytokines which are important for implantation, embryo implantation. And there are lots of studies also which shows the benefits of embryo implantation by doing a scratching. And also they have shown that scratching causes benefits by creating a synchrony between the endometrium and the embryo to be implanted in the subsequent cycle.
Dr. Aditya, can you please tell us about progesterone elevation in a stimulated cycle?
Yes, if we are suggesting about premature LSRs or premature development of the follicles, and we should think about in the first half of the cycle antagonist cycles and collection of the pickup of the eggs and storage of the embryos, and later on we can transfer in a subsequent cycle maintaining the good endometrium.
Dr. Marcus, can you please give us your input about natural cycle transfer? How do you go about it? And is it beneficial in some ways?
Natural cycle transfers?
Yeah.
Yes. I think all transfers work, all endometrium preparations work the same way. The benefits of natural cycle preparation is that you use much less medicine. That's the most important point. There's no advantage in pregnancy rates or others. Only in the you save medicine.
Do you think that we need to monitor these cycles in some specific ways? How are the monitoring of these cycles different than the other cycles, normal cycles?
So if you use a natural cycle preparation, of course, it is very, very important that you exactly know when the ovulation happened, because you have to adjust the transfer of the embryos according to this. If you have artificial preparation, then this is not of such importance. Only when you start the progesterone.
Thank you, Dr. Marcus. Dr. Ajit, can you please give something new like oocyte freezing? What is the scope of oocyte freezing and what?
Oocyte freezing, and I should say a little bit in wider term. Freezing is a very applied and good procedure to have the solution for the infertility. But in this case, I would like to make it little clear. Cryofeasibility is a way which can decide the successful outcome of the freezing. That can vary from person to person. But in embryo and oocyte freezing, there is no way to check the cryofeasibility. If we are freezing the sperms, then we can check the cryofeasibility by freezing and by thawing. That how this much is the percentage of the successful outcome of retrieval. In certain cases, the retrieval may be 70 to 90%. I have seen in so many cases. But in oocyte, because they are in limited number, and embryo are also in very limited number, so that can be not possible to check the successful outcome of retrieval after freezing and thawing. In that case, we should make comfortable and informative to the patient concerned that we can take a chance, as you are talking about the natural cycle, that we can have only when we are having the frozen embryo or oocyte. But that can't be 100% a guarantee that the whatsoever number we are freezing will be retrieved as such. There is a chances that all may be retrieved by any technique, whether that is a vitrification, whether that is a slow freezing, or whether that is any other technique or any media. But 100% retrieval is not possible in all the cases.
Dr. Puneet, NOVA is I think using oocyte freezing a lot. So could you please give your inputs on that?
So yeah, I would say that oocyte freezing is now giving us very good results. The technology is advancing. We are doing oocyte freezing both for cancer patients who are undergoing chemotherapy, prior to that preserving their fertility preservation. We are doing oocyte freezing for patients for social reasons, those who haven't found the right man, right partner. And thirdly, in some special circumstances, especially in religious conditions where, let's say, the TISA and the female are kept on the same day, and unfortunately we don't find samples in TISA and they don't agree for donor sperm insemination. So in those cases, oocyte freezing doing.
What do you say about the results?
The results are very good. I mean, recently I would say we did 2 thaw and transfers and inseminations. Both of them got pregnant. So yes, I think the technology is advancing and it is working. It is working.
Upon the experience of the embryologists, we also at AWARE are doing oocyte freezing, and we have got a very good results with oocyte freezing. We also recently got a pregnancy with that. So minimal stimulation protocols we just touched upon. Dr. Anupam, yeah, please.
Is there any difference of the time lag of the oocyte freezing when you are using after a year, after 10 years? Do you really find any difference?
So they have
nothing
other than that. Yeah, it's safe. But according to the Indian law, we have to take consent for initial 3 years, and then it has to be updated. But other than that, clinically and lab-wise, it's safe to freeze for n number of years.
So luteal phase support, there is, Dr. Puneet, could you please add something about GnRH agonist in luteal phase? We are using that as a luteal phase support.